The nursery was a place designed to soothe, yet to William Ashton it felt like a theater of cruelty. The pastel walls, painted with smiling lions and soft clouds, seemed to mock him with their innocence. He stood rigid before the reinforced glass, staring at the tiny figure swaddled in a powder blue blanket. His son, his heir, lay utterly still save for the slow rhythm of his chest rising and falling. Nurses moved briskly around the room, their rubber soles squeaking faintly against polished tile. Their voices low, clipped, professional. To them, it was routine. To William, it was the unraveling of a carefully constructed future. Dr. Peterson's voice reached him like a verdict. The initial tests are consistent with profound bilateral sensory and neural hearing loss. Your son is deaf. The words hung heavy in the sterile air. Blunt and irrevocable, William's jaw locked as though he could crush the sentence itself between his teeth. Deaf, not delayed, not uncertain. Deaf, the syllable ricocheted in his mind, threatening to split the calm mask he had cultivated over decades of negotiations, takeovers, and high-stakes gambles. For 20 years, William Ashton had lived in a world where every problem could be reduced to numbers and conquered with strategy. Competitors were neutralized, markets bent to his will, governments courted, rivals ruined. There was always a lever to pull, always a price high enough to buy the solution. But now, on the other side of that glass, lay the first problem he could not negotiate away. His manicured hands pressed against the barrier, leaving faint crescents where his nails dug into his palms. He tried to summon the voice of reason, to remind himself of the empire he commanded. Ashton Technologies was a $30 billion machine built on his unrelenting belief that everything had an answer. This would be no different. Already, his mind sketched a planned private jets dispatched for the finest pediatric audiologists in Europe. Research teams funded with blank checks, clinics scoured from Zurich to Tokyo. Money is no object. He muttered, more to himself than to Dr. Peterson. Whatever he needs, wherever in the world we must go, I will find it. The doctor's face softened with the weight of compassion. Mr. Ashton, I understand, but this is not always something that can be fixed. Her phrasing lit a spark of anger in him. Fixed, as though his son was a broken machine, a failed product rolling off the assembly line. William straightened, his eyes sharp and unyielding. Everything can be fixed. We just haven't found the solution yet. Through the glass, the infant stirred, his tiny fist punching upward into emptiness. William's breath caught. The gesture was fragile, uncoordinated, but to him it looked like a challenge, a plea. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass, silently promising the boy that nothing, no diagnosis, no doctor, no immutable law of biology would define him, the future he had envisioned. The legacy he had promised his father and his board might now hang in silence, but William would not surrender. And yet, for the first time in his life, power slipped from his grasp. A tear, hot and unexpected, slid down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, as though it had never existed, but the crack had been made. In all the years of ruthless ambition, no adversary had ever forced William Ashton to weep. His newborn son had, without sound, undone him in seconds. Behind him, phones buzzed with missed calls. The world demanded his presence, but William stood motionless, pinned between the glass and the impossible truth. His perfect vision of legacy had shattered the moment he heard that one word, death, and in the silence that followed, the most powerful man in Silicon Valley made a vow. If the world had no solution for his son, he would create one himself. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of William Ashton's Malibu estate, its waves glittering under the late afternoon sun. The house had been celebrated in magazines as a masterpiece of modern architecture, sleek lines, glass walls, Italian marble floors that gleamed like still water. Yet to William, the grandeur had become oppressive, the vast rooms echoing with a silence far heavier than luxury could mask. 2 years had passed since that day in the hospital, and though James had grown from a fragile newborn into a lively toddler, the silence surrounding him had only deepened. Catherine's heels clicked sharply against the marble as she paced the living room, her hands twisting at the sleeves of her cashmere sweater. She was a woman who had always appeared immaculate, her blonde hair never out of place, her composure rarely cracked, but today, her eyes shimmered with restrained frustration. The specialist in Stockholm said exactly the same thing, she said, her voice brittle. He is deaf. Well, completely. We have to accept this. William stood at the window, his reflection a ghost against the Pacific horizon. He did not turn. Then they're not looking hard enough. His voice was low, controlled, the same tone he used to dismiss analysts who told him a merger was impossible. I've just wired $5 million to Dr. Harrington's program. His team in Zurich is making progress with neural interfaces. It's only a matter of time. 2 years, Will. Catherine's voice cracked, louder than she had intended. 2 years of chasing miracles, of dragging James across continents for endless tests and treatments. He needs stability. He needs to learn how to live in his world, not be forced into yours. William finally turned, his eyes sharp, his jaw like stone. His world is mine to build. Catherine, I will not let him grow up trapped in silence when there is any chance that he can hear. Her face tightened, grief and anger battling for space. She wanted to shout that James was not broken, that he was perfect in ways William could not see. But she knew the futility of arguing with a man who had built an empire on refusing to accept limits. She drew a shaky breath and lowered her voice. And what if there is no chance? What if this is who he is? Will you spend his entire childhood trying to fix him instead of loving him as he is? The question struck William harder than he let on. For a flicker of a moment, doubt trembled inside him, an unwelcome guest. He turned back to the ocean, unwilling to let her see it. Everything can be fixed, he repeated, though this time it sounded less like conviction and more like a plea whispered into the glass. From the hallway came the sound of soft laughter. James was sitting on the floor, locks scattered around him. He did not hear the waves outside, nor the rise in his mother's voice moments earlier, but he giggled with joy as he stacked towers, his small hands moving quickly. Catherine sank to the floor beside him, brushing her fingers through his hair, her face softening in a way William had not seen in months. See, she whispered, he's happy. He doesn't know he's missing anything. William lingered in the doorway, his gaze fixed on the boy. James's eyes lifted, catching his father's figure in the shadows. He grinned, raising his hands in a gesture Catherine had been teaching him. His small fingers curled into a shape, one simple sign, one simple word, love. William froze. For a heartbeat, the fortress around his heart cracked open. He wanted to kneel, to embrace his son, to return the gesture, but pride stiffened his spine. Instead, he only nodded curtly and stepped back into his office, where walls of screens lit up with market figures and acquisition papers waiting for signatures. Alone, he sank into the leather chair and buried his face in his hands. The hum of silence pressed against him harder than the surf below the cliff. He could not shake the image of James's fingers forming the word love. For the first time in his life, William Ashton wondered if the empire he had built was useless. In the face of a truth he did not yet dare to name. Asterisk, but before he could surrender to that thought, his phone rang. The name flashing on the screen was Dr. Harrington. William's pulse quickened, hope sparking anew. Perhaps the breakthrough he was waiting for had come. Perhaps the silence could still be broken. And with that fragile hope, William ignored the sign his son had given him, unaware that the path he had chosen would soon collide with the truth revealed, not by a billionaire's lab, but by a little girl who had nothing but innocence and eyes that saw what no expert ever bothered to see. Asterisk, the night was heavy with the smell of sea salt and damp earth. As William Ashton sat in his study, the glow of muted city lights filtering through the glass walls, his empire hummed in the background, emails flashing across screens, assistants pinging him with updates on negotiations in Tokyo, investment portfolios ticking upward. But William felt the weight of defeat pressing into his chest. Dr. Harrington's latest call had been little more than a mirror of every other conversation he'd endured these past 2 years. Promises, promising results, potential pathways. Always the same script, yet James remained unchanged. The silence was still absolute. Asterisk, Catherine had long since stopped joining him in these late-night vigils. Her patience had worn thin, her voice echoing with weary finality each time she told him, he needs you, not your money. And yet, William could not yield. Yielding was weakness. Weakness destroyed legacies. Weakness left empires in ruins. But that night, it wasn't Catherine's words that haunted him. It was James's small hands, the gesture he had made only days earlier, a word shaped without sound, love. William could still see it, those fragile fingers lifting like a torch in the dark, and he had walked away, The soundless world of his son was becoming more unbearable for him than it was for James himself. William began to notice details that unnerved him. James smiling at sunlight, streaming through curtains, laughing at shadows dancing on the walls, responding not to voices, but to vibrations. A heavy door closing would make the boy look up, though no spoken word ever stirred him. There was intelligence there, a spark that none of the doctor's reports captured. Yet William, afraid of being wrong, kept burying those observations beneath a fortress of data and funding. One afternoon, Catherine came home with arms full of shopping bags and found James in the playroom, staring out the window at the gardener's radio. Though he could not hear the music, his small body swayed with a strange rhythm, his tiny palms patting the floor in time with vibrations that pulsed through the walls. Catherine's throat tightened. She had never seen him so alive, so aware of something outside himself. She hurried to William's office, where he was pacing through a phone call about an acquisition. "Will, you need to see this." He barely glanced up. "Not now. London's on the line." But Catherine's tone sharpened with a desperation that cut through the static of his empire. "Now, William." When he entered the playroom, he froze. James sat cross-legged, his eyes closed, his hands moving against the hardwood in a steady, perfect beat. He wasn't copying, he was leading, keeping time. William's heart clenched. Something about it defied the absolutes written in every medical file. James opened his eyes, saw his father watching, and clapped once sharp, purposeful. He waited, gaze locked on William, then he clapped again, a challenge. William, shaken, lowered himself to the floor. His palms felt awkward, stiff as stone, but he clapped once. James's face lit up like the sun rising. He clapped again, twice this time, pausing for his father to follow. William obeyed, and for the first time since his son's birth, the two of them shared a gay-man unspoken rhythm that crossed the gulf between silence and sound. When Catherine returned later, she found William still on the floor, his tie discarded, his sleeves rolled up, his son's small hands guiding his massive ones. William looked up, and for the first time in years, his expression was stripped of pride. There was rawness in his eyes, something fragile and human. But with morning came the fortress again. William buried the moment beneath appointments, specialists, and fresh checks sent to Harrington's lab. He could not bring himself to admit that his son might not need a cure, but instead needed someone willing to enter his world. That would mean William had been wrong all along, and William Ashton had never been wrong. Still, late at night, the memory of James's hands kept beating against him like a drum in the dark, and it was into that fragile fracture that fate was about to wedge someone unexpected, someone who had no laboratories, no titles, no wealth. Just a little girl with a delivery bag slung over her shoulder and eyes that saw truth more clearly than the richest man in California ever could. The storm of revelation was building, and William Ashton, for all his billions, was powerless to stop it. The storm arrived on a Tuesday evening, rolling in from the Pacific like an army of shadows. The Malibu estate, usually a gleaming fortress against the ocean, seemed suddenly fragile beneath the pounding rain and the howl of the wind. Catherine had canceled the staff for the night. She wanted quiet, a reprieve from the endless hum of business meetings and whispered arguments, but William refused to pause. He sat in his study with a fire flickering in the stone hearth, reviewing a thick file of experimental proposals from Zurich, eyes glazed with exhaustion. Every chart, every promise, bled together into meaningless shapes. The doorbell rang. It was not the usual chime, but a sharp buzz, distorted by the storm. Catherine frowned. Deliveries were rarely made this late. She opened the door to find a woman drenched from head to toe, her delivery uniform clinging to her frame, a brown paper bag tucked against her chest to protect it from the rain. Beside her stood a girl no older than 7, a small figure swallowed by an oversized hoodie, her dark curls plastered to her forehead. The girl's sneakers squeaked on the marble floor as they stepped inside. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the woman said breathlessly, but the order said urgent. "Kitchen staples." "I couldn't leave it in the storm." Catherine accepted the bag with gratitude, insisting they wait out the worst of the rain in the foyer. She fetched towels, ushering them toward the warmth of the living room. William barely looked up, murmuring something about leave it with staff, but Catherine shot him a glare that silenced him. While the delivery woman sat gratefully by the fire, drying her hair, the little girl wandered. Her eyes darted curiously over the gleaming furniture, the shelves of leather-bound books, the glass walls that revealed the storm raging outside. Then she saw James. He sat cross-legged on the floor near the window, a tower of blocks rising unsteadily. In front of him, his small face was focused, lips parted slightly as though tasting the rhythm of his own movements. The girl crouched beside him, her soaked hoodie dripping onto the polished floor. "Hi," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear. She tapped her fingers on the floor. Tap, tap. James looked up, startled, then blinked at her. She tapped. Again tap, tap, and smiled. Slowly, James lifted his palm and tapped back. Catherine froze in the doorway, William's pen still in his hand. The girl giggled and began a pattern. Tap, tap, pause, tap. James watched her carefully, then repeated. It was startling precision. His face broke into a grin. For the first time that day, his laughter silent, but radiant filled the room with a light no sound could rival. "See? He's listening," the girl said simply, without turning around. Not with his ears, with his eyes, with his hands, with everything else. William rose abruptly, the papers in his lap sliding to the floor. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, harsher than he intended, but it trembled with something unfamiliar fear. Fear that this child, a stranger, had just undone years of doctors and dollars with nothing but instinct. The delivery woman jumped to her feet, apologizing profusely. "I'm sorry, sir. She's just a child. She doesn't mean..." But the girl shook her head firmly. "He's not broken," she said, looking straight at William. "You keep trying to make him hear like you, but he already knows how to hear. You just won't listen to him." The room went still, save for the rain hammering the glass. Catherine's hand covered her mouth, tears pricking her eyes. James beamed at his new friend, tapping once more against the floor with impatient joy for a man who had commanded boardrooms and presidents. William felt suddenly powerless before the words of a 7-year-old. His empire, his endless strategies, his billions, all of it seemed hollow as he stared at the undeniable truth playing out. Between his son and a delivery girl, he wanted to dismiss it, to reclaim control, but something inside him shifted. The fortress of certainty he had built around himself trembled on its foundations. He had seen James respond. He had seen his son connect, not to a doctor, not to a device, but to a little girl dripping rainwater on his marble floor. And though William tried to bury the feeling beneath anger, the storm outside seemed to whisper the truth. The empire of silence he had built around his son was about to collapse. And when it did, no amount of money could rebuild it the same way again. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the estate washed in a pale gray light. The ocean roared against the cliffs below, restless and untamed, as though it carried a secret too heavy to keep. Inside, the mansion felt equally unsettled. Catherine moved quietly through the kitchen, making coffee with a trembling hand. Her thoughts were not on the storm, but on the image burned into her mind. James and that little girl sitting on the floor, tapping patterns back and forth, their silent laughter echoing louder than any sound. William had hardly slept. He had retreated to his study after the encounter, burying himself in research papers and data, as if he could smother the memory under numbers and charts. But no matter how many medical journals he scrolled through, the sight of his son's radiant face, so alive under the girl's touch, kept flashing back. It gnawed at him the realization that a child, a stranger, had uncovered something that his billions and specialists had missed. The knock came mid-morning. Catherine opened the door and found the delivery woman again, her daughter peeking out. Shyly from behind her, the woman carried an apologetic smile. "I know it's unusual," she said softly, "but Maya hasn't stopped talking about your boy. She begged me to come back, just to see if he'd want to play again." Before Catherine could answer, James toddled into the foyer. The moment he saw Maya, his face lit up, and he hurried toward her, blocks clutched in his little hands. Catherine's heart twisted. Her son had never greeted anyone like that, not even his father. She stepped aside, allowing them in. They settled in the playroom again. Maya's small fingers danced across the hardwood floor, creating rhythms, games, signals that only she and James seemed to understand. His eyes followed her every move, his hands mimicking hers with uncanny precision. Catherine watched in silence, tears brimming as she saw her son bloom before her eyes. Then William appeared in the doorway. His presence was sharp, commanding. The air in the room tightening instantly. Maya froze mid-tap, glancing up at him, her wide eyes steady but cautious. James, oblivious to the tension, clapped his hands and reached for Maya to continue the game. "That's enough," William said, his voice cutting through the fragile peace. Catherine, Why are they here again? His wife straightened, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. Because James' response to her, Will, don't you see it? He's never engaged like this before. Not with us, not with any specialist, but with her, William snapped, his gaze flicking to Maya and her mother. She's a child, a delivery girl's daughter, not a doctor, not a therapist. Just a little girl playing games. Maya's mother flushed, murmuring apologies. But Maya stood her ground. Her small voice carried a weight beyond her years. He's not playing games, she said firmly. He's learning. You think he doesn't hear, but he does. Not the way you want him to, but the way he knows how. You keep looking for something wrong. I just see a boy who listens differently. Silence crashed down like thunder. Catherine's breath caught, her eyes darting between her husband and the little girl. James tapped impatiently on the floor, demanding Maya's attention. As if unaware that his father's world was unraveling in that very moment, William's fists clenched. His empire had been built on credentials, on the authority of experts, and the power of money. Yet here was a child and nobody by his standards claiming to understand what billions in research could not. His pride burned, colliding with something deeper, something he did not want to name, the possibility that she was right. Leave, he ordered, though his voice wavered ever so slightly, but Catherine stepped forward, blocking the path. No, Will, not this time. You're so busy trying to fix him that you can't even see him. That little girl does. She sees him, she hears him, in ways you never have. The confrontation left the air thick with tension. William's pride roared against Catherine's plea, against Maya's truth. For the first time in his life, he was caught in a battle he could not win with money or power. And as he turned back toward his son, he saw James still tapping, still waiting, still reaching not for a cure, not for a perfect legacy, but for someone willing to enter his world. The weight of that truth pressed on William like a vice. He could feel the empire of certainty he had built cracking beneath his feet. What William did not know, what none of them knew, was that this clash of worlds was only the beginning. The little girl was about to reveal something far more shocking than rhythms and games, something that would shatter every assumption he had clung to, leaving even the most powerful man in Silicon Valley humbled to his knees. The estate grew quieter in the days that followed, but it was not the calm of peace. It was the silence before a storm. William moved like a shadow through the house, caught between denial and something he could not name. His pride told him the encounter with Maya was meaningless, a trick of coincidence, a child's imagination, but his eyes could not erase the truth. James had come alive under her presence in ways no doctor, no device, no million-dollar program had ever inspired. Catherine, sensing her husband's crumbling defenses, allowed Maya and her mother to return. At first, it was just to deliver groceries, but soon Catherine invited them to stay, offering tea, asking questions. The little girl became a constant presence in James's playroom. William watched from doorways, arms crossed, telling himself he was only studying her influence out of caution. Yet every visit chipped away at the walls he had built. One afternoon, as the sun burned orange against the Pacific horizon, William found himself drawn into the room against his will. He had meant only to observe, but James had caught sight of him and clapped eagerly, a smile stretching across his small face. "Come," Catherine urged softly, her hand brushing William's sleeve. "Sit with them." For a long moment, he resisted, but James's eyes bright, insistent, pulled him down to the floor. He sat stiffly, the marble cool beneath his legs, while Maya set up a row of blocks. She tapped a pattern against the first block. James tapped the next. Then she looked up at William. Waiting. It was absurd. He was a billionaire, a man who had stared down world leaders, who had orchestrated mergers that shifted entire markets. And now a 7-year-old was staring at him expectantly, demanding he follow her lead. Against every instinct, William tapped. Once, twice, a rhythm. James squealed with delight, his silent laughter filling the room. Maya grinned. "See, he's listening." William felt something unfamiliar press against his chest and ache, almost painful, yet strangely sweet. His son was not staring through him as he often did when specialists prodded and tested. He was looking directly at him, eyes alight, waiting for him to join. For the first time, William was not an outsider to James's world, but the moment was too much. He pushed back, his pride clawing to the surface. "This isn't real communication. He said gruffly, "It's mimicry, a game." Maya shook her head with quiet certainty. "No, it's how he talks. You just never listen." The words landed like a blow. William turned away, ashamed of the sting they carried. Catherine's gaze pierced him, full of disappointment and something else, hope, fragile but alive. That night, William stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean, the crash of waves drowning his thoughts. He felt stripped bare. The empire he had built with precision and power meant nothing against the simplicity of his son's laughter. For the first time, he questioned whether all his billions had blinded him to the truth. The following days blurred together. William began joining the sessions, hesitant at first, then more willing. Maya taught James simple hand signals, gestures that grew into crude signs. James thrived under her guidance. His world expanded with each new motion, and slowly, painfully, William began to follow. His massive hands, so skilled at signing contracts worth billions, fumbled clumsily as he learned to sign simple words: eat, more, love. The transformation unnerved him. Each gesture felt like a surrender, like chipping away at his fortress of pride. Yet each time James responded with joy, with connection, the cracks widened. One evening, James signed love again, this time not just to Catherine, but to his father. William's breath caught. He returned the sign with shaking fingers, the movement awkward but real. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Maya smiled knowingly, as though she had seen this moment long before he could imagine it. But even as this fragile new bond took shape, William's mind remained restless. What if Maya was right? What if the doctors had been wrong from the very beginning? Could it be possible that the truth about his son had been hiding in plain sight, unseen by the world's brightest minds, but clear to a child who had nothing but empathy? The question burned inside him, setting the stage for the moment he feared most, the shattering of everything he thought he knew. The final reveal was coming, and William Ashton, billionaire, mogul, master of control, was about to discover that the most powerful truth in his life would come not from science, nor from wealth, but from the small hands of a little girl who refused to see James as broken. Asterisk. The Ashton estate glittered that evening, its vast halls alive with the hum of wealth and expectation. Guests in tailored suits and gowns moved through the marble corridors, glasses of champagne catching the chandelier light. It was the gathering William had planned for months, a dinner for investors, partners, and dignitaries meant to showcase not only his empire's next innovation, but also his perfect life. The irony gnawed at him. Behind the smiles, behind the curated perfection, was a truth he had spent 2 years trying to bury. His son was deaf, and the legacy William envisioned felt forever altered. James was there, tucked close to Catherine, his small hand clutching hers. He wore a miniature suit that made the guests coo, though most politely avoided mention of his silence. To them, he was a symbol, an heir to Ashton Technologies, a boy of privilege. They didn't know the hours of frustration, the tears, the silence heavy enough to break Catherine's heart. But Maya knew. Asterisk. She had been invited reluctantly, Catherine's doing, not William's. The delivery woman's daughter looked out of place among the glittering crowd, her simple dress borrowed, her sneakers peeking out beneath the hem, but her presence was magnetic, drawing James like a tide. He tugged at her hand, dragging her toward the grand piano that sat in the corner of the hall, its polished surface gleaming. The guests turned as Maya sat beside James on the bench. A ripple of whispers spread. Catherine's breath hitched. William stiffened, his glass hovering midair. He had not planned this. Maya lifted the piano lid, her small fingers brushing the keys. She struck one note, low and resonant, the sound vibrating through the marble floor. James jolted, eyes wide, his tiny palms pressed flat against the wood, feeling the tremor. Then he smiled, pure, radiant, as though a secret door had opened inside him. "Watch," Maya whispered, though her words carried into the hush that had fallen over the room. She pressed another key, then another, creating a slow rhythm. James tapped back against the piano's surface, his timing perfect. Gasps echoed among the guests. William's heart slammed against his ribs. He stepped forward, caught between terror and awe. Maya turned to face the stunned adults, her voice clear and unshaken. "He's not completely deaf. Nobody noticed because nobody listened the way he needed. He feels sound, not with his ears, but with his body, with vibrations, with low tones. You all saw what he couldn't do. I saw what he could." The room erupted in whispers, investors craning their necks. Catherine covering her mouth as tears spilled freely. William stood frozen, his world tilting beneath him. Years of specialists, millions poured into research, endless flights across continents, and it had taken a 7-year-old girl to reveal the truth. James banged his little fist against the keys, laughing silently, but glowing with joy as the vibrations pulsed through him. He looked up at his father, eyes wide with invitation. For the first time, William did not hesitate. He sat beside his son, his large hands trembling as they pressed down on the keys. The vibrations thrummed through the piano, through the floor, into James's body. The boy's laughter shook the silence apart, and William felt tears burning hot down his face. The guests, once a sea of polished indifference, were spellbound. They weren't watching a business tycoon display his power. They were watching a father surrender to his son's truth. Maya leaned close, her small voice piercing the storm inside William. He never needed you to fix him. He only needed you to hear him. The words broke him. The fortress of pride, of denial, of empire, all of it crumbled in an instant. William gathered James into his arms, holding him tightly, sobbing openly for the first time in his life. Not for the legacy lost, but for the connection finally found. The investor saw not a flaw, but a miracle. Catherine, through her tears, felt the weight of years lift. And Maya, the little girl no one had expected, had shifted the course of the Ashton family forever. In that glittering hall, the shocking truth settled like a revelation. The billionaire's son was never broken. He had always been whole. It was the father who had been deaf to love, deaf to his child's world, until a little girl showed him how to truly listen. The silence that once felt like a curse transformed that night into something sacred. And for the first time, William Ashton understood legacy wasn't about perfection. It was about love, spoken in a language beyond sound.